see you hang. Bear them away.
On the morning of April the 28th, 1789, Lieutenant William Bligh, the captain of His Majesty's armed vessel Bounty, was seized by a gang of mutineers. Their leader was a young man named Fletcher Christian. Given the most meager supplies and no charts or navigational aids, the mutineers hoped that Bligh and his men would either perish at sea or be marooned for life on an uncharted desert island. But this was not to be.
It's lying. I think it's lying.
Bligh accomplished the impossible and safely navigated the tiny boat 3,618 sea miles through the uncharted Pacific waters to the Dutch East Indies seaport of Kupang. There, he related his amazing tale, and thus was born the legend of the Bounty.
I am Lieutenant William Bligh. I'm a British naval officer. And I have to report an act of piracy.
The legend of Captain Bligh and the Bounty is one of the most enduring sea stories of all time. Though many have told the tale, very few know the fascinating truth of it. I'm Edward Fox. When Bligh returned to England, an investigation was launched to determine the cause of the mutiny.
We are trying to establish, Mr. Bligh, how you came to lose your ship.
I did not lose my ship, sir. It was taken from me by a gang of mutineers, led by Fletcher Christian.
The man you promoted.
Yes.
Following the British Admiralty's Board of Inquiry and his subsequent public exoneration, Bligh was hailed as a national hero. Unfortunately, after 200 years of plays, books, and Hollywood history, Bligh's name is now synonymous with evil, and the saga of the Bounty is an infamous international legend.
You know, now nearly 200 years after the incident that the world thinks of and knows as the mutiny on the Bounty, sitting here and looking at that beautiful island over there, Tahiti, it doesn't seem hard to understand why the men mutinied. After all, they'd come from the Georgian slums of England. They'd come from the restricted conditions on ship at that time. And they'd come through some terrible weather, having tried to go round Cape Horn and been beaten back. And they'd arrived here nearly a year after they'd set sail to find a tropical paradise, or so they thought. Nonetheless, here they were, with a population of people who revered them because they were fair-skinned, who lived a life not of total indolence and luxury, but so opposed to the life of which the English and the Europeans of the period were used, that the contrast created this earthquake that arose on the 28th of April in 1789.
The purpose of Bligh's voyage was to visit Tahiti and pick up a tropical plant known as the breadfruit. Nutritious and easily cultivated, these plants were to be taken to the West Indies and used as an inexpensive food source for the island's slave population. The ultimate responsibility for this mutiny must rest with the two men who commanded the Bounty. First, there was Lieutenant William Bligh, a dedicated seaman and a navigational wizard, who began his naval career in his early teens. Second was a young, well-bred officer named Fletcher Christian.
Christian was a man who was known to be unstable, given to bouts of deep depression and high anxiety. Fletcher Christian had travelled with Bligh before, been in the same, under his command before. Bligh and Christian had been friends, and Bligh asked Christian, would you like to come with me on this one? That was the biggest shock of his life, that Christian turned against him.
In 1977, the producer Bernard Williams was given a script written by the Oscar-winning playwright Robert Bolt. Bernie was immediately taken by the prospect of recreating this remarkable tale and making it as historically accurate as possible for the first time on film.
What we want to do is present all the facts as we know in film terms, and it's not about a man in black and a man in white, the good and the bad. It's about people who have all their virtues and their failings, and it's really an exploration into the personalities of the people and how they all reacted once they got to Tahiti. And it's a great story, and it's something that can happen today in any walk of life. A man could actually decide he's had enough and walk out. That's what we're trying to attempt to do out here, is to really put some vitality in the movie. Cast it young, because it was all about young kids. I mean, the average age of the Bounty crew in the 18th century was about 17, 18, 19. Christian was 22, Bligh was 33, and they were really the astronauts of the 18th century. I mean, they would just say goodbye at home and sail away and maybe come back 2 years later.
A coastal coal carrier named the Bethia was the vessel chosen for this long voyage. The British Admiralty purchased the ship for £2,500 and renamed her the Bounty. A short, stubby vessel, the ship measured only 87 feet. Of that length, 1/3 of her space was taken up by shelves, especially designed to hold the potted breadfruit plants. Plants that would ultimately consume a major portion of the ship's limited water supply. One of the first tasks faced by the production company was the construction of an exact replica of the Bounty. To do this, the international film financier, Dino De Laurentiis, borrowed the ship's original plans from the British Naval Archives, went to New Zealand and built a $4 million replica of the Bounty under the watchful gaze of Captain Mac Maguire.
As the ship has a spirit. As well as building the ship, we breathed life into it. In our capacity as senior Lloyd surveyor, we were asked by the film company at that time, would we supervise the building of the ship on their behalf, which was a boyhood dream to recreate an 18th century sailing ship. In 1978 we started, and in 1979 we finished. So it was a very tight program, and pieces of equipment, of course, came from all over the world to be assembled in one place to create. We didn't build the ship, we created it.
During the voyage from New Zealand to Tahiti, the replica Bounty would undergo an almost supernatural occurrence, an experience foreshadowing the magic that later permeated the entire production.
The whole voyage was an adventure, because you can plan meticulously, but always remember, gentlemen, the unexpected happens, and it did. The engine stopped at a most critical time in a 55-knot storm. We were about 20 miles off a reef and barely had the ship under control. It happened on a most significant date. It happened on April 28th, which of course is the day that the actual mutiny on the Bounty occurred. And in our navigation room, the clock stopped at 5 o'clock in the morning. That is the time the actual mutiny took place on board the Bounty. And that happened on April 28th. And that's when I wrote that little couplet. Over Bligh's grave we are passing, and it bodes us to tread light, for he is surely a-watching on this tempestuous night.
Before Christmas, December the 23rd, 1787, the Bounty set sail from Portsmouth Harbour. The crew consisted of 46 men, including a botanist and a gardener. Bligh, the only commissioned officer on board, commanded the ship as a lieutenant and not as a full captain, a position he felt he had earned. He was angered by this, despite the fact that naval tradition bestows the ceremonial title of captain to any man in charge of a vessel, regardless of rank. Bligh's orders were explicit. He was to proceed as expeditiously as possible around South America's treacherous Cape Horn to the Tahitian Islands. There, he was to fill 1/3 of the Bounty with breadfruit plants and immediately proceed through the Endeavour Straits to the Isle of Java. From that point, he would continue around Africa's Cape of Good Hope to the Caribbean Sea and the islands of Jamaica, deposit the breadfruit plants and return to England, making him one of the few sea captains ever to circumnavigate the globe.
Bligh maintained a lot of discipline. You know, he ran a very firm and very tight ship. The discontent started when they left England, in fact. He had unorthodox methods. He made the men dance every morning for 20 minutes to keep them fit. He was a disciplinarian. He was given to bouts of bad temper, foul-mouthed bad temper. But he wasn't a brute. He hated flogging, for example. Being involved in this film, one is very moved by the appalling brutality of life. For all concerned, Bligh included, you know, I mean, he was stuck here. If he couldn't take a joke, he shouldn't have joined, but they were all victims of circumstance in a way.
The first sign of trouble occurred when Bligh promoted his friend Fletcher Christian as acting second lieutenant and second in command over the head of the ship's master, John Fryer.
The man who held that position fell out of favor with the captain. And the captain and Fletcher, I suspect a bit of nepotism there because they were very close friends, very good friends. They'd sailed together twice before and had a kind of a partnership going. Well, Christian was eager to sort of learn. I mean, he came from a family that was, had been sort of faded gentry, I suppose you'd say they are, but the family had been great, but were down on their resources and funds. And you had to go out and get what you could, so he thought the best way to sort of climb back up the ladder was to maybe approach with a naval career. And he was doing all right until he decided to step out there in Tahiti.
On the 23rd of March, 1788, the Bounty arrived at Cape Horn. Considered the single most treacherous body of water on the planet, the seas off the Cape were known for their sudden and often deadly changes. Literally within minutes, calm waters can be shattered by mountainous walls of water, hurricane-force gales, and frigid ice storms.
We must turn back! In my opinion, we should put about. In my opinion, we should do it, sir. We keep on our course. You'll never make it round the Horn.
Well, they tried to go around the Horn, and they were beaten back by vile weather, and they persisted in their attempt to get around the Horn for something like 31 days, a month, and they got something like 80 miles, and they decided in the end, well, Stafford will go the other way. So they turned the tail around and went the other way. So it took a long time.
The terrors faced by Bligh and his crew in their attempt to round the Cape can only be compared to the awe experienced by the film's actors, standing there on the deck of the replica Bounty, facing a man-made storm more devastating than any they'd ever seen in real life. The task of creating the storm sequence required months of careful planning. As realistic as it was often very dangerous. Many times, the actors faced actual, life-threatening situations created by 4 giant wind machines, 8 1,000-gallon splash tanks, and an assortment of smoke boats, sprinkler systems, and fire hoses. When they turned it all on, the effect was nothing less than awesome.
The storm sequence is very important because it's got to be very dramatic in terms of cinema, and also a very strong story point. So when you see this horrendous journey of Bligh attempting to get around the horn, they think he's lost his mind, and that's when they get terrified. So it has to be visually an important sequence, and we're going to spend about 6 weeks shooting it. We're going to take the ship out at sea and shoot it in big swells and grey sea and grey skies. See a few seasick tablets about. And then we're going to tie off the ship to a barge for about a week to 2 weeks and just have all the aeroplane engines pumping all this water in and rocking the ship about. And then we're building a full, a 3rd scale model so we can do all those horrible shots which I would love to do with the real ship, but I don't think the crew would.
Having failed in his attempt to round the Horn, Bligh was forced to chart his course via the Cape of Good Hope. 7 months later, he sighted Tahiti. The entire trip had taken over 10 months and 27,000 sea miles. On October the 26th, 1788, the Bounty dropped anchor in Matavai Bay. After a voyage like that, I'd certainly be ready for a little shore leave, and so were the men of the Bounty.
They knew that ever since Captain Cook's first visit in 1769, the Tahitian men and women regarded the fair-skinned Englishmen as immortal gods. More importantly, everyone had also heard the many tales of native women exchanging sexual favors for iron nails. As a matter of fact, during one of Captain Cook's previous visits, his vessel was nearly dismantled by an overly zealous crew removing the ship's nails.
This historic event, the entire film company, cast, crew and equipment traveled from England to the Tahitian island of Moorea. Known throughout the world for its breathtaking beauty, Moorea was chosen for its unspoiled scenery and its close proximity to the actual landing site. Moorea was also chosen for its people, long known for their simple lifestyle and warm hospitality, all of which contributed to the beauty and the reality of the film.
The people, the Tahitians, are unbelievable. I mean, they make it real, they become real. And it became real for us. And Roger Donaldson, that night, said, I stopped watching it as a director. He said, I was just watching this event, this happening, this real happening, And he said that it was quite frightening, really, because he lost control, in a way, He stopped being a director, he just became a spectator.
The other day, when we were filming the sequences where they arrived in Tahiti for the first time, for me, it suddenly became like I was back in the 18th century. It was extraordinary. It was like being there. It became difficult to watch it as a movie director. realise it was all orchestrated and had been contrived to be like this. It was as though you were actually there witnessing a documentary event.
The canoes raced our two launches back to shore. They started splashing water at us and jumping around and rocking the boat and messing around with us, you know, and so taking our guns off and they're going, whoa, you know, whoa. And they normally speak in French, and not one of them spoke French. They all spoke Tahitian. And suddenly the scene on the shore, which we hadn't intended to go on as far as, suddenly became a big improvisation with, you know, hundreds of Tahitians all acting their socks off, you know. All I could see was how it might have been 200 years ago, for real.
Shooting on location always has its pluses and minuses. Pluses are that what you're shooting looks real. You're in amongst it. You've got the real locations. You've got the real people. You know, you get the smell of the place. The difficulties are that you're suddenly in a place working where movies aren't necessarily a way of life all the time, and you disrupt their cultural life. You disrupt their normal living routine. It can have major difficulties, and you know, luckily so far Bernie Williams, our producer, has minimised those problems in terms of getting through to me and affecting what I've got to do. But I know he must have had some headaches here. I'm very glad I'm not the producer on this one.
I enjoy what I do. It's a well-paid hobby, and so I don't consider it work. I wake up looking forward to the day, but you have to be dedicated, otherwise you never get through it. I mean, it is a big challenge movie. They're the kind I like. I wake up in the morning thinking to myself, should I be filming in New York or New Zealand, or are they waiting for me in Tahiti? And it gets you get a little punchy with it. I don't know. I just think of them as great big stages. I think I'm on stage 1 in England, stage 2 in Tahiti, and stage 3 in New Zealand. And if I apply it like that, it's just like a big back lot. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I mean, that's the way I approach it. Well, the biggest problem was that the schedule of this film was worked out very meticulously. In other words, we started backwards. We had 4 months to shoot the picture. In those 4 months, we wanted a month in England with grey skies and downbeat, down on exteriors. We wanted a month in New Zealand to do the ship going around Cape Horn. Again, down, grey skies. And then for Tahiti, we wanted the best 2 months of absolute blue seas and blue skies, total contrast, in other words. And, you know, you always get that marvellous tale every time a movie company goes there, anywhere in the world, is you say, what's the weather like? And they say, great, marvellous. And then after 3 hurricanes, they say, you know, it's the first year that ever happened. And that's the producer's nightmare. And so we had 3 of them.
Prior to the Bounty's dropping anchor in Matavai Bay, Bligh posted a set of instructions regulating his crew's conduct during their stay in Tahiti. Among these rules was one stating that no person shall mention the Bounty had come specifically to gather breadfruit plants. Another forbade the men to mention that Captain Cook had been killed by the natives of Hawaii. If asked, the men were to say that Cook was alive and well and living in England.
The rationale behind this story was simple. The Tahitians regarded Cook as an immortal god. In short, Cook was Bligh's insurance policy, guaranteeing his dealings with the Tahitian chief, King Taina.
Bring you greetings from His Majesty King George of England.
How is the great Captain Cook?
Captain Cook, he's well, and he also sends his greetings.
He lives?
Yes.
That's good. Some say he was killed in Hawaii.
No, Captain Cook is very much alive and in good health.
Unsure of how to ask the Tahitian king for the breadfruit plants, Bligh decided to let the king do his work for him. Presenting the many gifts that King George had sent King Tyner, Bligh suggested that the Tahitian chief should return the favor.
His Majesty King George has sent you many gifts, King Tyner. Perhaps I could carry back in return gifts from yourself to His Majesty King George.
Anything for a king. Figs, bananas, coconuts, breadfruit.
Breadfruit? Breadfruit is a very good idea. Yes, breadfruit. I think His Majesty likes breadfruit. Isn't that true, Mr. Nelson?
Indeed it is, sir. His Majesty is a very keen gardener. He would appreciate breadfruit greatly.
If you were to send him little breadfruit plants...
Legend has it that Tyner was so pleased by his renewed friendship with Captain Bligh that he sent his favorite wife to spend an intimate afternoon with him as a gesture of ultimate friendship. A good Christian family man, Bligh was not terribly thrilled by the prospect.
I hope to avoid this. Avoid what, sir? Damn it all, man, I'm expected to sleep with her. She's one of King Tyner's wives. A gift from one chief to another, as it were. Now look, 5 minutes after I go below, you must call me up on some important business, all right? Yes, sir. What business? Business, damn it, any bloody business. Sir. Oh, welcome aboard, ma'am. It's out this way. Yes. Come with your work.
She should soften the old man up a bit, huh?
The scene looks simple, but in actuality was complex enough to require 22 takes.
Everybody really had to give it everything. It was a very difficult, complicated scene. Lots of details, lots of people in the shot who weren't experienced actors and didn't understand what hitting their mark meant. Those sorts of scenes are sent to try us, and in my mind that scene will be worth sticking with because I think when it's in the movie it will look great.
Enter.
Excuse me, sir.
Mr. Christian?
Sir.
What demands my immediate attention?
It could wait until tomorrow, sir.
What is it, damn you?
The ship is sinking, sir.
Good.
Marker, take one.
Making film is a tremendously collaborative effort. Fortunately, on this project, the producer Bernard Williams was able to instill rare warmth and camaraderie among the cast and crew, all of which further complemented the special magic surrounding the picture.
I felt like Bligh. I feel we are haunted by Bligh in a way. Yes, I think maybe they're watching us from somewhere. You see, you don't really need to act. You're stuck. Here we are in Tahiti, and you're on the Bounty or wherever you are, you know. And you go with it, as they say, you know. It does the job for you, you know. The Bounty does the job for you. The atmosphere, the surroundings do it all for you. You don't have. All you have to do is be. Acting is easy. It really is easy. It's life. My favorite actors are people like Robert Mitchum and James Cagney. Those people who just do it, you know. No fuss, no bother. Learn your lines and show up. I come to life when I'm
Remember, you're all very nervous. Here we go.
I'm a nice man for my wife to live with, you know. I think. I love working, if you can call it work.
Captain Cook always speaks.
It's pretty good. And here we are in Tahiti. Never thought I'd come here. They pay me to do it, too.
My wife. This is a very happy mob, you know. There's always difficulties, there's always frayed tempers and problems, especially filming on the water, but they're all very approachable guys. That's what I like about it. Everyone's open and willing to try anything.
Creating this film was an extremely rewarding experience. But looking back, it's a credit to the film's producer that the project ever got started.
This marvelous construction crew came out here and sweated and built these beautiful sets, and I flew out here for one day, which kind of sounds a terrible waste of money, but all from England. A week before shooting, I came out and I went zap, zap, zap with my camera. I went proudly back to England and said, look at our fantastic sets. And as I'm saying, Terence is coming, the officer said, those fantastic sets have just been wiped out by Hurricane Dino or Hurricane something. I don't believe it. You never recover from those events. There are some funny sides to it. I mean, I phoned my production manager and I was talking to him and I said, now, about this hurricane, and he said, can you be quick? And I said, why? He said, there's a 20-foot tidal wave coming towards our hotel and I got to run. And he actually ran in the middle of the telephone call, and they slept in the kitchen all night under the cookers. It must have been horrendous.
The Bounty spent a total of 5 months on the island paradise of Tahiti. The obvious question is why? Why did it take so long to pick up a load of breadfruit? In part, the answer lies here in England. His departure from Portsmouth, delayed by British Admiralty red tape, combined with the futile attempt to round Cape Horn, caused Bligh to miss the seasonal South Pacific trade winds, forcing the Bounty to wait in Tahiti for their return. During that long wait, the crew was allowed to roam the island and mix freely with the native women. Marriages were made, babies conceived, and naval discipline had all but disappeared.
And the mutiny is not really about flogging men and stealing coconuts. I mean, it's about men being enticed by this paradise and starting to lose their values, living freely with the natives, and this breakdown of discipline. And quite frankly, making the movie here, I'm having that problem because people are going troppo within 2 days, and at 11 o'clock in the morning, their brains can't think because it's so hot. And all they want to do is run in a bar and have a pina colada. But, so I sympathise with Bligh now, trying to keep this crew together for five months, which he did then.
A magic land marked by diamond white beaches, sapphire blue waters, and an abundance of natural food, and a population renowned for their exquisite beauty. An island paradise even in this day and age. Imagine what it was like 200 years ago. The Tahitian people of that time were deeply religious. A journey through their lush rainforests reveals a vast collection of ancient temples and strange sacred places. Intricate stone monuments praise powerful gods who controlled all aspects of the Tahitian life. The island people even believed that the mating of men and women inspired these gods to provide a greater abundance of crops, including the breadfruit. In an effort to appease these gods and guarantee a good crop for the British king, King Taina threw a lavish feast for Bligh and his crew, a feast climaxed by an erotic fertility dance.
It must have been like the first guy who stepped on the moon, or except there weren't any creatures on the moon. Here there's creatures, and they're all sort of swarming. Not only are they different, attractive, but they're friendly as well. So it's just like some kind of dream.
In his testimony before the British Admiralty, Bligh states that this feast marked the beginning of the end of naval discipline. His men had become intoxicated by the island and its women. Much like the film's storm sequence, the picture's dramatic structure hinged on the impact of this scene. The director, Roger Donaldson, worked meticulously, ensuring that the dance sequence fully captured the wanton impact of that night so many years before. A difficult task that was made more difficult by the decision to film at night.
Well, obviously shooting at night's always difficult. People get tired, and on a movie you don't have a lot of time to actually shift from day shooting to night shooting. So one day you're shooting day shooting, you've been up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Next night you're finishing, you're onto a night shoot and you're finishing at 5 o'clock the next morning. So suddenly, it's like flying halfway around the world. You get a bit phased at first. Then you've got the elements to deal with, and it can get fairly miserable at times. But finally everything got resolved last night, and the movie that I wanted to make was getting made last night, and that was fantastic.
Filming the complex dance sequence required long waits between takes. Fortunately, the cast was never at a loss for ways to entertain themselves. Choreographed from descriptions found in Bligh's diary, the creation of the dance sequence required weeks of preparation. Rather than use seasoned professional dancers, Tahitian natives were chosen to ensure an authentic look to this pagan ritual. As a result, many long hours of rehearsal time were needed. Although the dance sequence was filmed at night, crewmen began preparing the sets and dance floor early each morning. This was followed by afternoons sewing costumes and tattooing the actors and extras to duplicate the look of their ancestors 200 years before. During his time on shore, Christian quickly embraced the Tahitian lifestyle. It wasn't long before he'd fallen in love with a young Tahitian maiden. Legend has it that the woman was none other than King Tina's daughter.
Take this tusk, and when you see it, you will remember my daughter and my
Christian's relationship with the king's daughter was a bell that tolled the end of shipboard discipline. The future mutineers had found themselves a leader. By the time the Bounty rang in the new year, 1789, Bligh had become thoroughly disenchanted with his officers and their undisciplined behavior. His biggest disappointment was Fletcher Christian. More than once he'd come ashore and found Christian out dallying with the native women. Bligh now realized that if he was ever to leave Tahiti, it would have to be soon. Suspecting their imminent departure, 3 men deserted ship. Furious at this unforgivable breach of conduct, Bligh sent out a search party. 3 weeks later, the men were captured, brought back to the Bounty and subsequently punished.
The 3 deserters were flogged. They could have been hanged. 3 deserters on the island. We flogged them because they deserted. Desertion was demoralizing for the crew and was a capital offense. We had them flogged to make them an example. But he hated flogging. He knew that it broke a man's spirit. And in those days, the Navy was so tough that a man would rather go up the mast and do rigging in cold weather than face the terrors of a commander.
A commanding officer's rage would usually manifest itself in the form of flogging. Comparatively speaking, Bligh was unusually lenient when it came to applying this brutal form of corporal punishment. During the Bounty's entire 17-month voyage, Bligh administered only 10 floggings, totaling 217 lashes. By contrast, one of Bligh's contemporaries, Captain Hugh Piggott, ordered 85 separate floggings, totaling 1,392 lashes over a 9-month period. A fact that obviously refutes the popular misconception that Bligh was a cold-hearted sadist. On the 1st of April, 1789, the last of the 1,015 breadfruit plants were loaded aboard the Bounty. 3 days later, as the sun set behind the jagged mountains of Tahiti, Captain Bligh and a despondent crew set sail for England. Ahead lay 27,000 miles of open sea and the frightening knowledge that Bligh had been ordered to sail through the treacherous Endeavour Straits.
Having left the island after more time than he should have spent on it, Bligh began to realize that his crew were not the competent men that he believed them to be on the voyage out. As I say, they had been sucked in by the beauties of the society and the people here. And then they had completely neglected their duties. When Bligh finally decided that it was time to leave, he had a ship that really wasn't capable of sailing across the lagoon, let alone the 27,000 miles necessary to return to England.
In an attempt to restore naval discipline aboard the Bounty, Bligh began to ride his crew, constantly damning his men for their slipshod behavior. The main recipient of Bligh's verbal abuse was Fletcher Christian.
Christian finally decided that he had to leave the ship and could not stand it any longer. And as dusk was falling, started to make preparations and form a small raft from bits of driftwood and timber and cordage that was lying around on the ship's deck. At that critical moment, some young crew members came up to him and made it quite clear that they would support him in any action he took and that it was foolhardy to go over the side. And by inference, rather than specific suggestion, gave him the spark that created the mutiny.
The key to this mutiny is timing. The timing of that fateful night watch, presided over by a distraught Fletcher Christian. Due to a strange twist of fate, this particular night watch included most of the men who harbored a grudge against Bligh.
The mutiny was a very quick affair. Historically, it was a very small, insignificant mutiny. For some reason, it's got a lot of notice in history. It's become the most important and bizarre mutiny because it was over very little. The mutiny took place one night in a flash, and the mutiny happened within minutes. Fletcher Christian one night, one of the men approached him and said, "Let's take the ship." And Christian said, "No." He said, "Well, there'll be no killing. Let's take the ship now. The armor's chest is open." And put Bligh overboard.
The mutineers rounded up all members of the crew who were loyal to Bligh. Much to their chagrin, they discovered that this group amounted to well over half the crew. It was impossible for all to join Bligh in the 23-foot open boat, so a number were left aboard the Bounty, and the rest cast adrift, armed with 4 cutlasses and the most meager of supplies.
It amounted to just a few gallons of wine, very little water, a few pieces of mouldy pork, and that was about it, apart from some personal possessions, a box of papers, a sextant, but no charts. Christian, on the other hand, had gone, as far as Bligh was concerned, back to Tahiti. His crew were shouting across the stern as they departed, "Hooray for Tahiti." They obviously wanted to get back to the women and the indolent life they'd led.
Historians have long speculated over the reasons for Fletcher Christian's emotional breakdown. Why did this well-bred young officer commit the ultimate naval offense?
Because he was suffering unbearably. Up there someplace. He was unbalanced.
I am in hell! Hell, sir! Why being so damned reasonable now? God damn your blood to hell with mine, sir. God damn your blood. Mr. Christian, get a hold of him! You be quiet or I will run you through. Do it, Christian, kill him!
It's very much real people under a lot of stress. You know, outside their own environment, suffering from all sorts of things like, who am I for a start? You know, what am I doing here in this strange place? Identity crisis and the pressure just gets to them. 10 months at sea, God, can you imagine a little chamber pot like that? And I think the mutiny erupts as a result of just bad chemistry aboard, certain flaws in each man's character that sort of operate, come together, have a chemical reaction, explode, and then disperse.
You will be silent! Get out of it! Go! Damn it! You will be silent! I will have you killed, you bastard! You blow my daughter, Mr. Grant! Do you run me through, and you have my blood in you! And...
When the Bounty returned to Tahiti under the command of Fletcher Christian, the crew received an unexpectedly cool welcome from King Tyner.
You shame me by coming here. You shame me. King George will send many ships with many guns to punish us for what you have done.
Fearing retribution from King George, King Tyner politely ordered the mutineers to leave Tahiti. Christian then took the ship to a nearby island and set up a colony. Unfortunately, he placed his settlement in the center of two warring kingdoms. 6 months later, acknowledging failure, Christian returned the Bounty to Tahiti, where he concocted a brilliant plan to rid himself of dissidents and non-mutineers alike. Arranging a large celebration, he invited a large number of Tahitians and then carefully divided the party into two groups. He placed those he wished to leave behind on shore and those he wished to take with him aboard ship. At the appropriate moment, the anchor cable was cut and the homeless men and women of the Bounty set sail, their destination unknown. After months of roaming the seas, the mutineers finally located the mischarted and uninhabited Pitcairn's Island. Shortly thereafter, one of the earlier deserters, Matthew Quintal, in a drunken rage, set fire to the Bounty, stranding the men and women on the island for eternity. Over the next few months, the mutineers established an island kingdom, subjugating the Tahitians as slaves. Shortly thereafter, their Tahitian captives rebelled, murdering all but one of the mutineers, including Fletcher Christian. Or did they? Years later, one of the non-mutineers left behind on Tahiti, a midshipman by the name of Peter Haywood, claimed to have seen Fletcher in 1808. Rumors persist that Christian eventually reached northern England's Lake District and lived out his life with the help of the poet William Wordsworth. In the meantime, Bligh had accomplished the impossible. After 48 days in the 23-foot boat, without benefit of charts or provisions, Bligh landed his tiny vessel in the Dutch port of Kupang on June the 14th, 1789, having traveled a total of 3,618 sea miles. To this day, no one has come close to duplicating this feat. Ever the disciplined sailor, Bligh mapped the entire region during his voyage, discovering and charting many of the Fiji Islands along the way. Upon his return to England,
Bligh was court-martialed for the loss of his ship, a formality required by naval law. Cleared of all wrongdoing, Bligh became a national hero. As the years wore on, Bligh survived 2 more mutinies, served as the governor of New South Wales, and rose to the rank of vice admiral. Finally succumbing to cancer on December the 7th, 1817, at the age of 65. Over succeeding years, the tide of public opinion turned against William Bligh. The trend began when Fletcher Christian's brother, Edward, a respected lawyer, financed the defense and publication of the Bounty Mutineers' court-martial in an attempt to clear the family's name. It is one of history's little ironies that over the years, an unstable, emotionally distraught figure like Fletcher Christian should be remembered as a hero, while William Bligh, the man who saved the lives of 17 men in a 23-foot open boat and who continued to faithfully serve his country, should be remembered throughout the world as a villainous monster.
Court is assembled by the Right Honourable Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, and I quote, to inquire into the cause and circumstances of the seizure of His Majesty's armed vessel, the Bounty, commanded by Lieutenant William Bligh, and to try the said Lieutenant William Bligh for his conduct on that occasion.